in a way, I take my mess and now help people because I've experienced it. And I think so many people are on that path. Those that you help can only go as far as you've gone. And I'm even the last sentence in my book in the epilogue after my mom passed. It's like, and now the healing begins. I think we continuously heal.
I think that's the complexity to always be holding is like you're always the caterpillar, you're always the cocoon, and you're always the butterfly. Like you're all three all the time because there's always something that's being cooked, you know?
Yeah.
Like, and the moment you think your shit is done, like I just laugh now because the universe will give me a cosmic fucking dump truck to the head. Like, oh, you thought you had it? Oh.
I think that moment when you realize that shit's gonna hit the fan forever.
Man. And it's like,
that acceptance, and so it is.
The big silence, empowering personal experiences, inspiring compassion, and healing lives. We are no longer silent. We are here.
The big silence. The big silence.
Welcome to the Big Silence Podcast, Mark Groves.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited.
I know in real life in Austin, you're here for your event, which is tomorrow, which will be past when this airs, but
it will be in history.
Yeah.
But I'm excited to be here. Thank you for having me.
Of course. I don't remember how long I have been aware of you, probably through social media, which you're not on anymore, which we will discuss that. But you are a relationship expert and a speaker and the host of Create the Love, or your own podcast, the Mark Groves Show, and then Create the Love. And I think it's so interesting. I kind of want to talk about where you came from and here you are now, because I love when there's a transition in careers, passions, how you can move from one industry to the next. And you were in pharma for 14 years.
Yes, I was.
Yes.
Still undoing the karmic path of that. Yeah, it was, I loved it. I learned so much. I worked with incredible people. I had, one thing that was, I was sort of reflecting. I was in sales also. I worked at like the Future Shop of Canada, or the Best Buy of Canada was called Future Shop. And it was like you were trained on the most aggressive sales techniques, and I wore a suit and sold extended warranties. It was like everything everyone's afraid of when they go into an electronics store. But I learned in that how to build rapport within seconds, because you had to, and how to influence behavior. And then as a rep, I felt like I was really part of something, like part of helping people, serve people, heal people. And then when I went through a breakup in my late 20s, I realized that I was really good at relationships, but I wasn't good at romantic relationships. And that didn't make sense to me because I was like winning awards in sales and launching drugs and, doing really exceptionally well. And yet I couldn't be vulnerable. I wasn't having hard conversations with my partner. And so I got engaged when I didn't want to. Like, that didn't make sense to me. And so when I looked back, I thought, well, this isn't a skill set issue. There's something else here. So I started to study romantic relationships, the science of them, because I wanted to sort of get into the logistical, linear aspect.
So you would say like your rock bottom moment was realizing you had this romantic relationship engagement and then calling it off. Did you call it off, or
I did?
You did, yeah.
I did, and I'd say that's where at the time, and I would say even into like 5 years later, when I started Create the Love and I started writing about relationships and I started working with people and left my job, it was then that I had this recognition of like, oh, I thought that was my rock bottom. And it was a rock bottom. It was like an awakening in that what I was doing wasn't working. And the path of life I was creating wasn't authentic to me. And I didn't even know what that meant. I just knew that I couldn't bring someone else down this path anymore. Because that was really the impact, was I was recognizing that my own fear of ending it. And she is an incredible woman, so that was really hard because I'm like, why don't I want her? And I couldn't make it make sense. And sometimes it doesn't make sense, And I would argue that often the sort of leap or decision that connects you back to yourself is usually something that's big It's usually something that aligns you back to being able to trust yourself, because until you can say no to something that's not aligned, your yes actually isn't real. It's not authentic. And I didn't have access to no and yes. I mean, I did the job I was taught. I got the degree I was taught. I did everything I was supposed to do. And yet I felt unfulfilled. I felt disconnected. I felt afraid. I would say my true rock bottom was probably when I was 19 and I experienced a giant betrayal in relationship. And then unconsciously, I entered a relationship and was terrified of love, terrified of being chosen, terrified of actually being loved by a woman, who could choose me.
So at 19, what can you explain the betrayal?
Yeah. It's, I'm sure for everyone, they'll be like, oh, when you can hear a story and you're like, I already know how this ends. We were together for about a year. She went away on a scholarship. I'm from Canada, so she went away to the States on a scholarship. And she came back. We in June, and I think her semester started in like August or something. She had to be down there for training. We had made the agreement that we could see other people. We would just tell each other about it. Yeah. So
No,
we're already like, oh yeah, I've heard this story. This is a great movie. So she comes back in October for Canadian Thanksgiving, and she had a best friend who was down there with her. She came back too, and then they brought back this friend of theirs. The friend of theirs just happened to be built like Adonis and the running back of the football team. And he wanted to see what Canadian Thanksgiving was like, which for all of you who might wonder, it's the exact same. We just don't have the big shopping holiday after. Okay. So I'm sitting at the Thanksgiving dinner table, and I'm there with her mom, her stepdad, her, and him. And I just have this realization, like, I don't know, maybe while I'm eating mashed potatoes or stuffing, and I'm just like, there's something going on here.
Yeah.
Like, there's something going on between them. And why is he at this fucking dinner and not, can I swear? I don't know. Yeah.
Yes.
Why is he at this dinner and not at the other friend's dinner? So my only memory of the rest of that night is not something cool like I threw the mashed potatoes and was like, this is BS. It was, I remember being at the bottom of the stairs and my vision is blurry because I'm crying. And I'm like, is this how you tell me? And she's like, yeah.
I'm sorry, but that's kind of an asshole way of...
Yeah, it sucked. It sucked. It sucked. But what I'll say is that when I left there, because I didn't share with people what I had gone through, I was ashamed. I'd been betrayed before in a relationship. I was ashamed about that. So it's like, I'm not enough that people can be loyal to me. I'm not. When I love people, they betray me, they cheat on me, they lie, I lose myself. I don't stand up for myself. And all that meaning was being created as I drove away. And I tried to find resolve in the bottom of a pint glass, like I started to drink more. I tried to engage in casual relationships. And I joke about it now, but like a month, right after that is Halloween, which bad timing for a breakup, Halloween, because, everyone's operating in their shadow. It's like Vegas everywhere.
Yeah.
And I take a girl home to my parents' house. Well, it was like one night stand 101. Do not take the chick to your parents' house. And, all systems are supposed to be go, and I can't get an erection. Never happened to me. Never. First off, I've never done anything like that.
Yeah.
And I don't realize that my body, I know this deep down when I'm more in sobriety the next day, that my body's protecting me from putting myself in circumstances, because intimacy leads to connection, leads to love, leads to betrayal. I still haven't, it's been 3 weeks. I haven't processed anything. But I ended up just trying to figure out that if I drank enough, I could drink away my sensitivity, my values. And so the relationship I was in for 5 years with the woman I was engaged to, I never really let her love me. I never let her choose me. And so now in hindsight, I can see, we all have Thanksgiving dinners. We all have a moment like that. And I'm 100% clear that external betrayals are always preceded by internal betrayals.
Yes.
And if you look at my story, like when I said in June, we can see other people, we just have to tell each other about it. I agreed to that. I didn't want to do that. Had I honored myself, I never would have found myself at that table.
I think a lot of people can relate in terms of not being able to let people love you. And I can, because I had to work really hard at that. And that goes back to my childhood. So I'm interested in what relationships you had in your childhood, whether it be from parents. For me, growing up with a schizophrenic mother and not knowing that she had a mental illness at the time. And I believed everything she said. I believed she was trying to save me and get me away from my father because he's the Antichrist and these people were bad. She was protecting me. And then I find out that that is all not truth. So that's the betrayal.
Yeah.
And then...
And how do you trust the world?
Who do you trust now?
If you can't trust your mom.
Yeah.
You're like, where your portal.
Yeah. So that was a long time.
Yeah.
That's my whole... led into a whole bunch of other things, but through different relationships. And even with Bobby, in the beginning of our relationship, I was like, no, because I was with someone for about 6 years, left them. And then years later, met Bobby. But I was like, no, I don't really want to date. Let's just have fun. But in my head, I'm like, no, I love him.
I want to date him.
I
just met him. I want to date him. He's so sweet.
But we had to go through that too. And you had to learn how to trust love again.
Yeah.
And love yourself again and feel worthy. So how did you get there?
Man, I was pretty deep in the work from about that engagement ending till 35. I found myself on a video call with a really incredible relationship writer named Kelly Marceau. And I had an article that I'd written that went viral that was called Why You Might Not Be Ready for the Evolved Man You Say You Want. I would definitely remove the word evolved now because that's such a bleh. But, you get to look back at your writing and be like, I'd change that. But the article was dialed because the whole idea was like, we complain about the things we desire. It could be any gender. But then we complain that we can't find it, but when it shows up, we actually don't want it because we don't trust it. And so it's not that we're afraid of commitment. We're afraid of what commitment leads to. And so as you were, saying that if the model of where you're supposed to learn attunement, presence, attachment, like, did you feel seen, known, and soothed by your mother? Those are the questions that Mark Wolin asked. And it's like most of us are like, maybe one of those, but very few of us are three of those. And for me, on that call, Kelly Marceau said to me, you know a lot about relationships. And I was like, oh, sweet. Like, nice compliment. And then she was like, but I have a question for you. Have you ever let a woman love you? And I was like, yeah. I'd been in 4 serious relationships up to that point. But I got off the call and I was like, holy shit. When was the last time I let a woman love me? And that's when the Thanksgiving dinner revealed itself to me. And so the journey back was the recognition that I hadn't let anyone in. I realized that because I hadn't uncovered that story, I hadn't resolved. I had rejected the guy who sat at the table, the guy who allowed that to happen. And because I rejected the younger version of me, I couldn't learn from him. So I found myself in this meditation like a couple months later because I was really intentional about this. I'm like, well, that's not going to be my life.
Yep.
Like I could all of a sudden see the Rolodex of all these amazing, incredible women who were like mature, who were like, Mark, I like you. And I'm like,
yeah.
The chemistry is not here. It was here till you said that. My stomach feels off. And it was really that I was just terrified of being met. I was terrified of where the story went if I let them. And so I was in this meditation and I had navigated some of those stories and the meaning I'd made. And I could just feel like 22 2-year-old Mark sit back down in my body because he was welcome again.
Mm-hmm.
And it was like, oh, like I've spent so much time judging the choices I made instead of learning from them.
I want to go back to your childhood though.
Okay, yeah.
'Cause
let's go. I'm on the couch here.
But what happened in your childhood that you were drawn, like you didn't trust love?
Yeah. Yeah, so I grew up with, I have an older brother and an older sister. My sister's from my dad's first marriage. And like as a teenager, I feel very blessed because my dad would talk to me about relationships.
Mm-hmm.
He would be the one like asking me, how's your heart? How's this? He's always been that, which is a beautiful model for a man.
Yes.
And one that's very rare. My mom was really overwhelmed when I was young. You know, she had one daughter that she was a stepmom to, which she loved doing, but she also had my brother and I, and she was overwhelmed. And she was always or most often, dysregulated in fight, flight. And she was, you know, very much like all about caretaking other people, codependent.
Mm-hmm.
And so what I unconsciously did was merge with her.
Mm-hmm.
And so if mom's okay, I'm okay.
Mm-hmm.
And so what happened was my external focus became other people's needs. And I didn't develop needs, wants, like consciously. So in relationship, even when I was in my first relationships, I was all about them. And the messaging I also received as a teenager was men are bad, men are rapists, men are toxic. I used to think that was getting better, but I'd actually say that's worse now, the messaging that boys are taught. And so I was terrified of having boundaries. I didn't have access to anger because I was like, if I have a boundary, that's actually controlling.
Mm-hmm.
So I didn't stand up for myself. I was a doormat. I placed other people's needs ahead of my own. And so there was societal conditioning. Also, when I was in grade 8, I was a little overweight at that time. And like maybe like 30 pounds or 20 pounds, which is a lot when you're, you know, 5 foot and 4'11". And I have a very clear recollection of a kid that I knew. I was at a birthday party and he called me a porker. And I have a very clear recollection of how I then walled up.
Yeah.
Like already I was protecting myself in some way due to carrying more weight. But then I experienced social rejection. And then I walled up. And actually in the summer between grade 8 and grade 9, and I think this is probably important context for everyone who listens to this, between the summer of grade 8 and grade 9, I just mountain biked and I just exercised. And I played soccer too, so I was like starting to get really fit, but I also wasn't eating very much.
Yeah.
And my grandma who lived next door, she was like a little chunky old lady, and she would take Slim Fast.
Oh, those were the days. My mom was a Slim Fast
Right.
woman, pushed that shit on me.
So it like foams makes you feel full, the idea, but I can't even imagine how much high fructose corn syrup and all this shit was in there.
Yeah.
Because again, here's another shortcut to resolving your emotional pain. So I didn't do it healthily, but I lost weight. And then eventually I went back to regular eating, but I was so active and playing like high level soccer at this point and all the sports that I didn't put on weight. I just stayed fit. But all of a sudden girls liked me. Mm-hmm. And I was like, I was the same fucking person I was in June and now it's September. And so there was like a part of me that really wanted to be chosen, really wanted to be loved, but also didn't trust that either because I'm like, people didn't love me when I was 20 pounds heavier. Mm-hmm. And now you love me? Like there was this recognition of the superficiality, which at the time I really resented. Now I just understand it because it's evolutionary.
Yeah. And now it kind of makes sense too about you being off social media. Like, did you feel like you felt like that little boy again if anybody picked on you or didn't accept you for what you said?
Yeah, it was kind of like an interesting, because as I healed codependency within my interpersonal relationships, I had this deep calling to continue to speak forth what I was witnessing during COVID. Psychologically, like I couldn't believe a lot of the levers that were being used in public health, which is again, not a judgment for any choices anyone makes, but I ethically, I couldn't witness the use of morality and shame because it's so toxic. And we can see all the results of this. Families are split because of a public health choice because they levered these things. And so I was speaking out about what I was witnessing, and I was reading these clinical trials being like, that doesn't make sense. And we can all, in hindsight, we know a lot of the messages were not, we now are like, they never said that. They said all the things. But what's interesting is I started as I healed codependency within my own interpersonal relationships, which is really like, can I be all of me? Like codependency is about like compromising your own well-being, your own sense of self, your own self-expression for safety and security. And within my relationship with my wife, that was being resolved. It was like, we were very much bringing like, where are you afraid to be all of you? And, you know, we wrote a book about it. So, but then I started to notice and I started to see that it's like that, you know, as above, so below, like as within, so without. It's like you take the micro pattern of fear of self-expression. And as you become bigger within your interpersonal relationships, it starts to influence. It's like hurt people, heal people, heal people. So as you resolve and find your voice and take up space, all the people who are not doing that try to keep you small because it's easier for them to keep you small than for them to become big because they have to live with the dissonance of their own unanswered potential. So why not just shrink you? That's easier. So what I noticed was as that was spreading, I also had this like over 1.1 million people that I'm getting this reflection. And I would say the universe delivers. A troll is a great catalyst for personal growth. Because for every wound you have, there's a troll farm specifically for your not enoughness, your need for understanding, whatever it is. And so, I noticed that one, I was sort of addicted and like in golden handcuffs to Instagram. But I started to notice that the dynamics, I felt anxiety in relationship to the platform. So then I was like, okay, I started to journal on it. Why do I feel anxiety in relationship to this platform? Because I feel powerless. Why do I feel powerless? Well, because one, the algorithm is always changing. So you never know how it works. That's exactly like an abusive relationship. You never know what works, what doesn't. You get some love bombing, then you get criticism. So you get some virality, then they take it away. So when there was not an algorithm that was, so Instagram changed. It went from being a following for it, so who you follow, you get their content, to content for it because they saw TikTok's success. TikTok said, cool that you follow these people. We don't really care. Because what we notice is that you're watching cat videos. So although you want to see personal growth stuff from Young Pueblo, we don't care. Here's some more cat videos because that's what keeps you on the platform, and then we can show you more ads.
For me, it's Pomeranians.
I mean, I get it. Pomeranians are cute. They're like little, this isn't Pomeranian, is it?
No, I would never skin my palms.
Just kidding, everybody. This is vegan. So what I noticed though is that when that shift happened, you started to see a totally different way of engagement and et cetera. But what they did with creators was they would say, oh, the algorithm, so the algorithm is always a mystery. You never know how it works. No amount of, they're not like post once a day, post twice a day, post 3 times a day. Oh, wait, go back to once. Oh, we don't want static posts. We want video posts. Oh, they got to be less than a minute. Now you got to do dancey, pointy videos. You need to use viral music. You need to, so everything's this fucking agenda.
Yeah, and you're like, for me, I'm like, I'm not a dancey, pointy person. I refuse.
Never. I was like, and by the way, you can't read them. They're like, here's 5 things. Oh, fuck, what were they? I have no idea. And so I'm just like, as I'm experiencing this, I'm also sharing only factual things. And I'm noticing I'm getting shadow banned for certain like conversations. You mention a word, you had to like block out letters because a specific word would shadow ban your account. And that could be vitamin C.
Yeah.
Vitamin D, like it's crazy when I look at it. I'm like, how are we all not going, this is bananas? But I feel like that scene from Zoolander where he's like, what is this, a school for ants? This needs to be 3 times that big. I'm like, are we all not seeing reality? But with all that said, what I noticed is that if you said the wrong thing, it could all be taken away. So that's very much like financial abuse and those dynamics. I realized I built a business in someone else's business. That's just dumb.
Yeah.
You know, so there's a saying that you built a mansion in someone else's backyard. So I started to see all of this. And then I was talking to Dr. Stephen Porges, who is the creator of polyvagal theory. So he's an expert on the nervous system. And we were talking about how, it's like one thing, like humans generally, the shape of our childhood and adulthood is we're like constantly vigilant about where we fit, and then we shape our behaviors based on that. But the hypervigilance seeking of approval has our nervous system often in fight, flight, freeze, fawn, right? Like it's constantly like surveying for threats. But he said what's interesting about social media is that, like, for you and I, if we're in a conversation right now and there was no social media and this didn't exist on social media, which it will, is like as soon as we shut off these microphones or we're not sitting around a fire having a conversation with a group of people, there's no social threat, right? Like there's no one to judge us, say something about us because we're not available. But now for 24 hours a day, your profile sits there, available for trolls, criticism. And this is true whether your profile is private or not, whether you're a creator or not. We have to think on the like very base level evolutionary way the biological human system works, not how we would idealize. Like, no, it's fine for me. The evidence shows that when two people sit at a table with their phones face down, they're less vulnerable. Even with their phone in their pocket, because unconsciously they're always thinking about what's going on and the social possibilities of what criticism, all the things, success, right? All the dopamine. So what happens is not only are there humans who are constantly capable of criticizing you and bots, but there's actually an algorithm, a non-human entity that is constantly assessing the value of what you say and what you do, and you have no idea what it is. There's no metric. So that inherently puts you in a state of dysregulation. And then add to that, last thing I'll say, is that relationships and anything that's relational, if I feel impacted by something you do, like I'm feeling like how I felt about Instagram, I'd be able to talk to you and be like, hey, this is the impact this behavior's having. How can we create something different? There's no feedback mechanism. I had over 1.1 million followers. For me to get a hold of a customer service person, are you kidding me?
Right.
It's almost impossible. You have to know somebody at Meta or Instagram to get any form of customer service, and they might never reply.
Correct.
Because they don't give a shit. And see, that to me, I'm now exploring, like, is it possible to have a healthy relationship to social media? I think the difference with something like YouTube is that they at least pay you for your content. So there's a value exchange. They're like, we appreciate the energy, the life force. It might not be a lot, but it's something. Instagram's like, we don't give a shit about your life force. We will extract everything from you and leave you desolate. They know the impact of everything they're doing. Look at The Anxious Generation, the book by Jonathan Haidt. They know everything that's occurring. And yet they're doing nothing. And we're talking about mental health. And yet I would argue that almost most of our mental health is a lot of our suffering is correlated to social media because it's just amplified the unresolved stuff we have, much like, coming back to where we began. It's like, yeah, my micro codependencies interpersonally just became collective codependency. And so what I've learned is that I might go back to Instagram. Who knows?
Yeah.
But I know I'm not going back. I took a minimum of 6 months because I needed to be able to say no to it so that if I do decide to go back in relationship to it, it's by choice.
Yeah.
And that's the key.
And then with that relationship, you set those boundaries.
Exactly.
And you're in a good place. And I would say when Instagram came out, it was a really nice.
It was great.
Pre-Instagram, like you could, and even pre-cell phone, like we could just go about our day, about our business, and not
a sandwich
worry.
was a sandwich.
I know. It didn't. Hold on, let me take a photo.
Yeah.
I'm a part of that too, and obviously with my business and nutrition and fitness, and spreading the word.
Well, think of all the beautiful
health.
things you've created, right? I mean, like that's the thing is like I created amazing things, and I met my wife on Instagram.
Oh, amazing!
Right,
yeah. Well, I use Instagram as a positive thing through Tone It Up or through the Big Silence and mental health, which a lot of times Instagram doesn't like me talking about mental health and certain topics, but
Of course they wouldn't.
but I just keep pushing for the good. And if you're shadow banned or someone has an opinion, I'm like, that's just one opinion. But think about like how you stick to like that one troll and their one comment.
Yeah.
When you're actually helping so many more people.
Totally. That's the thing, is you start to learn, like, if you're going to put value to good comments, if you're not going to put value to bad comments, you also need to explore what you do with good ones.
Yeah.
In that, like, we just need to make sure that the people we take feedback from are trusted sources of feedback. Someone with a cat profile picture or like no profile picture, and no offense to cat profile pictures, I just mean like somebody who isn't themselves, as Brene Brown would say, they're not in the arena. Mm-hmm. If you're not in the arena, like your opinion is hidden behind like some sort of account with 9 numbers, like get out of here. I don't care. Yeah. And you have to learn. That's so important, because like I think now more than ever, we have to develop trust in our own choices. And so there is something really valuable by being exposed to things like trolls, or because we're like, oh, that's an unresolved wound. Mm-hmm. Like, how did my whole day get derailed because like Tracy from Minneapolis said that I shouldn't say that, or it's this, or it's that. It's like,
so does your
sorry,
wife,
Tracy.
Does your wife have social?
She does, yeah.
Yeah.
She doesn't really use it. She like has, my wife is like Yoda. She's like, yeah, she uses it when she wants. She's always done that. She has no addictions. Yep. She's like, she's never really drank. I'm like the guy who was like beer bonging, and, I got addicted to things quite easily. Mm-hmm. And I'm an overconsumer. Mm-hmm. Which I would say at the basis of that was a desire to get away from being present within myself. Yeah. So the Thanksgiving dinner haunted me for many years without me knowing.
Have you been through therapy?
Oh yeah. Many. I've done therapeutic trainings. I've been to the depths and still go. Still. I always have a coach or a mentor or a therapist or all of them. Yeah. Yeah.
So codependency, people pleasing, I can feel you on that. Because I was always making sure mom's okay. Yeah. Even the last 5 years of her life. Forget about taking care of me. Right. Okay. Is she safe? Does she have the best doctors? Is she, all the things. So let's talk about codependency, and also your book, Liberated Love, which your wife wrote it with you.
Yeah. We go.
How was that process?
It was good preparation to have a kid. Because, the book is kind of representative of the same thing. We like took 2 of us and alchemized our knowledge, our awareness, because she's deep in this work too. And we wrote about our relationship journey in it as well. So it's like layered with parts of our story, skills, questions, all that kind of stuff, points of inquiry. And so, it was, I don't know that we'll ever write a book again together. Yeah. We talk about that.
I know sometimes with Bobby, I'm like, let's do this together. And then I'm like, never mind. Never mind.
Yeah, I think we just learned because we have such different creative processes.
Yes.
Like, I'm like, do I feel like writing? And she's like, we have a deadline. And I'm like, yeah, but what are deadlines really? Yeah. And she's like, rules, order. So we're very different that way.
First, I want to ask, is this a hummingbird on the cover? Do you know?
I don't know, actually.
Oh, okay.
Let's looks say like yes. Oh, open it up. Open it up. Is it?
No, it's not.
Oh no, it's headless.
It's
a headless bird.
I love hummingbirds, and actually, it's my tattoo. And Bobby was like, "Oh my gosh, that's the hummingbird on the cover."
It's whatever bird you desire. But I do love hummingbirds. I actually think we have hummingbirds around where we live, and I'm always just so enamored by them. They're so beautiful. The other day, I saw a moth that looked like a hummingbird. Yeah. And I was like, what is this thing? And it actually had a beak that rolled up. And then when it was in the flower, it would go out to go in the flower. Oh, and so I looked it up. It was incredible.
Okay, I want to talk about attachment styles.
Yeah.
That's a good one.
It is.
Because I know in my past I was nervous attachment.
More anxious.
Anxious, yeah. And now I'm... What's the secure?
Secure, yeah.
Yeah. So that's a lot of growth. Can you talk about that, and even in your journey of finding your what we can call liberated love.
Yeah. Yeah. So for those of you who might not be familiar, or maybe to just give it a little refresher, attachment styles are really based off research that was done where they looked at a mother and a child engaged in a room. Mm-hmm. And so the child would be playing and mom would leave the room and mom would come back, and then they'd look at how the baby responded to mom leaving and coming back. So the first one, mom leaves, mom comes back, baby's like, oh my God, I can't believe you were gone. Like, stays by mom's side, doesn't leave mom's side. The idea, when you leave, I'm not sure you're going to come back. Anxious attachment. Mm-hmm. Second one, mom leaves, mom comes back. Baby's like, what's up? Goes, connects with mom, goes back to playing. I trust you. That's secure attachment. Last one, mom leaves, mom comes back. Baby's like, didn't even notice you were gone. No big deal. I've been playing this whole time. Don't need you. Avoidant attachment. But what's interesting is the avoidant child is actually experiencing physiologically the same response as the anxious child, is just expressing differently. So what some people might experience, they might be like, well, I feel a bit anxious and I feel a bit avoidant. And that might look like, oh, I really like you, you're over pursuing. And then they're like, oh, I like you too. And you're like, eh.
It's like me and Bobby. I'm like, I don't really want to date. You can date other people, but don't.
Yeah. That's like my Thanksgiving dinner. Yeah. Like, it's totally
it's
cool.
So fun, but
lies. And so, yeah, if you look, like both of those cases are self-abandoning. Yeah. It's like I'm prioritizing connection to other over connection to self. So anxiously attached people, the sort of underlying narrative is other people's needs matter more than my own. Mm-hmm. Avoidantly, other people's needs matter less than my own, and secure, other people's needs matter as much as my own. And so how I really like to think about it, and for everyone listening, you can change your attachment style. Mm-hmm. You can become, and we talk about it in the book, earn, secure. And the overlap, which has really been missing from a lot of the literature in this space, is the overlap of the nervous system and how important it is to understand how the nervous system really drives these behaviors and how do you heal your nervous system. And so a real simple way to think about it is we normally think about it in the context of my relationship to another person, but it's actually your relationship to space between you and another person. Mm-hmm. So anxious people get triggered by space, and avoidant people get triggered by closeness. Mm-hmm. And so from a nervous system perspective, the person who is anxiously attached has a hard time self-regulating. So they actually need another person in order to regulate their feelings. Usually that's because mom didn't have a regulated nervous system, because the template of where we learn nervous system regulation generally almost always is from mom. Mm-hmm. And so we didn't learn that, and we don't regulate our own nervous system until about 3. So that's why we need our parent to bring us down. That's why when a baby is like hysterically crying and you rock them, your regulation is actually regulating them. It's the closeness. There's so many things going on physiologically, like in the esoteric world. Like, it's crazy that when a mother and a child, the mother is, if they're breastfeeding, will change the composition of the milk based on what the baby needs. That's wild. Yeah. Secondly, if they're co-sleeping, when the child comes out of deep sleep, the mother will come out of deep sleep. So this is all happening somewhere in the fifth dimension. But avoidants more so have a hard time co-regulating. So what happens when, like you're in a relationship with a therapist or a coach or a mentor or someone who is balanced and integrated, is your nervous system is actually experiencing co-regulation. So the next time you want to go text somebody who you're like, I probably shouldn't, you call a friend. And the friend allows you to regulate. So you start to learn how to regulate your own system. You sit a little longer. That's why things like cold water exposure are really important, because they sound like just things that are like biohacks. But what actually happens in a cold shower is your body goes, you're going to die. And then you realize as you build more capacity to stay in there longer that you're okay. Yeah. And so the same thing happens when you're triggered. Is you're like, oh, I'm going to die without them, or they don't love me. And you're like, and so the skill that gets transcended from that, that's why even like making the rule to make your bed every morning, it's not inconsequential. It's actually really important, because when you say you're going to do something and you do it, that small choice actually leads to when you're in a conversation with someone and you need to know that you trust yourself. Again, like me leaving Instagram. It's like now I have access to know. with Instagram, me leaving a relationship. Now I know that in that relationship, I have access to no, I don't drink. I don't drink because I know that when I'm in relationship to alcohol, I forego choice. So now I'm in choice in that relationship.
Yeah. So would you say if you're in a anxious or avoidant that you probably have a lot of relationships that are codependent?
Yeah.
Yeah. And
You
so
usually date each other.
yeah. Or friendships.
Yeah.
It could be friendships, business. I mean, I've been in all of them.
Codependency shows up a lot in work.
Yeah. Have you ever experienced when you have transitioned to secure or just setting boundaries, period? And you talk in chapter 8 about boundaries. I have noticed that a lot of those people that were in those codependent relationships with you disappeared.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. You know, there's a saying that the people who benefit from you having no boundary, like the people who will have a problem with your boundaries are the people who benefited from you having none.
Yes.
We have to take responsibility for that. We co-create all these relationships. So the challenge that most anxiously attached people or people who are codependent have, and I'm a recovering anxious, my wife is more avoidant, is that there's a self-identification, or part of the narrative is that we're a victim of the story. So like, it doesn't mean that we couldn't have been victims. See, that's the hard part. The complexity of this is important. Stepping into being responsible for your life doesn't mean that you're responsible for what happened. And that is usually where we get stuck. You know, in that terms like victim blaming, things like that come up, and that can be true. But what I'm saying is you have to hold the complexity that you might not have had a choice about what's happened, but you do have to take responsibility to do something with what's happened. And so for anxiously attached or codependent people, what really needs to happen is this recognition that you've co-created all these relationships. If you feel taken advantage of, you're dating addicts, you're dating people who just won't listen to that podcast, read that book, change, go to therapy. You chose all of them.
You're saying yes
you're
to it.
You're part of it. And I would even say that the way you go about it, most people who are codependent, and part of the dance of codependency and the other side of codependency, it's still codependency, is like one person is like, I'm going to fix all the problems, take care of everything. And the other person, because that person needs them, is like, I'm a problem. I'm not an adult. I have a hard time communicating. I have an addiction. I have these things I always have to fix. So I have to be broken because you need me to be broken, because if I'm not broken, you don't have a job. So this is like when you see an addiction, one person gets sober, finally, and the other person's like, all their shit comes up because they're like, their addiction was healing their addiction. And so we start to, you know, my friend Terry Cole, who writes about codependency too. Oh,
she's been here twice.
She's so great. And she's like, I love her story where she said, in my 20s, I could take a fully functioning adult and make them underfunction. Like I could make it, they could have all their poop in a group and all of a sudden now they need me.
Yeah.
And I'm like, that's so true. It's like, oh, we find the thing they need to fix.
Yeah. Terry Cole, boundary boss.
Oh, she's hilarious
She's
too.
the best. So can we talk about, people listening, and they're probably, and a lot of my girlfriends who are single and around my age and wanting to figure out what they need to do, and like the you call them like blind spots in your book on page 74. Can we talk about, not all 11 of them, but some of the blind spots that stand out the most to you and are the most common? Yeah.
So shame, number one, that something's wrong with us. Like that blind spot prevents us from, because if you believe something's wrong with you, then, and that's an inherent belief, then what happens when you believe there isn't? Like, how do you connect to other people if you're not connecting from the place of brokenness?
Right.
So usually what happens when someone is stuck in that shame cycle is let's say they have an addiction or something, or they have something they want to fix. They start to look at it, they make a mistake, and they go back into the spiral, and they can't get themselves out of it. Because now there's a such thing as healthy shame. And that's hard to reconcile with, because like if we hear Brene Brown, she says the difference between shame and guilt is I did something wrong, and shame is I am something wrong. But healthy shame is the violation of our own morality. It's the violation of our own principles. And so there is something that we're being directed towards when we feel shame. And the antidote to shame is really humility, but it's taking charge for what we make things mean in our lives. But shame really blocks us. Like my wife, when we were dating, she was in shame spirals all the time. Like, what's wrong with me that I can't choose Mark? What's wrong with me that I can't accept his love? What's wrong with me that I don't want fully 100% to be in this relationship and I don't know why, which was very similar to mine.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember one day I said to her, like, what happens if there's something right with you?
Mm-hmm.
Like, what happens if your inability to fully choose this is actually incredibly wise? Like, we've tried to psychotherapy this thing. We've done all the things. But like, if our relationship requires that you feel like something's broken in you to be with me, then that's not serving either of us. So like, why don't we orient differently? And it was the first time either of us had ever done that. It's like, oh, what's right with you that you can't choose it? And what's really interesting, which was brought forward by us actually confronting that, one of the principles of liberated love is like, what's coming up for one person is coming up for both people. So what she was picking up in her shame and in what was really trying to come forward was that the relationship still required this experience of brokenness and me fixing it to stay together.
Mm-hmm.
So like, how do we stay together if we don't have this dynamic? We'd be two functioning, healthy adults. Come on now. Like, how do you do that? And I see this a lot where like one person is trying to make the other person healthy. The other person is healthy. The other person gets sick because people don't know how to relate from wellness. Mm-hmm. So that's one of the blind spots. Yeah.
Yeah.
What's another one that you want to dive into?
Let's see. Let's do familiarity. So this is just how things are. Change isn't possible. This is it. This is how it is for me. And I think change is inevitable, as we know.
You're right.
And it's something very important to, I love change.
Right.
Surprise, change. Let's talk about that.
Well, think about what lives underneath that story of change is impossible and this is just the way things are. When I wanted to leave my engagement, a lot of people would say to me, just be grateful for what you have. When I wanted to leave my job in pharma, people would say, but you already have a great job. Like, why would you want more? Mm-hmm. And I realized, oh, wow, this is so fascinating. Like, in hindsight, I could see, I'm supposed to feel guilty that I want more. Mm-hmm. Like, why am I not just grateful? And so what most people would do would be like, oh yeah, I guess like something's wrong with me that I want more. And in that statement of the change is impossible or this is just the way things are is learned helplessness. Mm-hmm. And if you think about that, that's really like, that's going to hover in depression. Because depression is really to depress feelings, right? And for me, the true pathology of depression is a lack of access to expressing core emotions.
I would agree with that.
Yeah, so if I don't have access to joy, anger, grief, disgust is a core emotion, sexual excitement. If I don't have access to these core emotions, then what will happen is eventually, they'll usually show up first as anxiety, shame, or guilt. And Dr. Hilary Jacobs Handel talks about this. She calls those inhibitory feelings. So when we have another feeling that's not safe to feel, we feel anxiety or shame or guilt. And so eventually that becomes depression. Mm-hmm. And so learned helplessness is this idea like there's no point. Like I can't change. And we usually learn this just through our lineage. We witnessed our mom never leave or our dad never leave or them stay in the same jobs or them. And of course, there's circumstantial reasons that can be true. But that doesn't mean it has to be true for us. Yeah. So familiarity can be a real trap. It can be a real trap because this is the life I'm supposed to live. This is who I'm supposed to be. I've never witnessed anyone change. And also, whenever you step towards change, you have to increase your capacity to hold what comes with change. So from a nervous system perspective, we have to be well, resourced in order to do that. And we build resource through things like community, like Tone It Up. Like I'm sure thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of women have experienced transformation because they're around other women transforming. Mm-hmm. So if you're hanging out with your group And they're all like mopey mope, drinking Chardonnay, complaining about their lives and their marriages and their relationships. And then you witness, like, all of a sudden you start hanging around with a bunch of people who are crushing it and like stepping fully into their relationships, you know, and changing their bodies, changing their nutrition, changing all these things. Now possibility is there.
Yeah.
And that's all because you hung out. You literally could just hang out with 5 different people and change your life.
I absolutely agree with that, who you surround yourself by. And I also, as we grow and meet new people, and maybe you realize that maybe that person over there was a toxic relationship. And I think some people are afraid to change, but no, I've known them since high school. I've known them since college. They're my best friend. But then you're starting to grow apart as you're trying to be better in life and do great things and be positive. But they're over here with their Chardonnay,
right.
talking about bad relationships, being in narcissistic relationships, being...
That's a classic complaint. There's a lot of groups on that one.
Oh, yeah.
But notice those are like trauma bonds.
Yes.
So not to say that those aren't traumatic experiences, but if we make our lives that, I say this a lot to people when they like have a social media name that's something like recovering from narcissistic abuse.
Yeah.
I'm like, who are you when you're not?
Yeah.
Like that becomes part of your identity.
Right.
You know, which like, I say that fully understanding that was part of my identity, was like recovering from a breakup and discovering. So it's like, who are you when you're not that?
Yeah.
You know, like, why not just be you? It doesn't mean we can't have brands and we can't have things like that. But it's like, we have to start to decouple the wound from the brand. We have to, it's like a lot of people who help people. Again, this is a recovery group. This is not on an Eiffel Tower pointing it. I've been in it and I'm always in it. Is like a lot of people who help people because they're good at helping people, because their survival strategy was to help people. So they have a hypersensitivity to be able to attune to other people to figure out what they need because they needed to do that. So this is therapists, coaches, doctors, nurses, dietitians, everybody, right? In this space, physiotherapists. But what happens is unconsciously they need to be needed. So their work truly isn't liberating till they're not needed for their work, till they don't need the client to need them. And this is like where codependency leaks into service providing. And this I started to teach. I was teaching this at like a therapist and coaches and healthcare practitioner conference. And it was amazing to see how people were like, holy shit. Like my survival strategy as a kid, I turned into a thing to monetize because I'm really good at it. And I'm like, yes, exactly. And your clients are never fully free till you don't need them to need you. And what happens there is your survival strategy becomes a superpower because it's no longer a codependent hook. And in the book, we talk about codependent hooks, like these unconscious ways that we hook into people and make them have to stay close to us, that they can't leave, that they can't. And we have many techniques we use for that.
Yeah. And some manipulation.
Deep manipulation, but some of it shows up as altruism.
Oh, yeah.
Like, oh, I'll take care of that for you. I'll help you with that. I'll pay for that.
You had a podcast I was listening to about kindness.
Yeah, the shadow side of goodness.
The shadow side of goodness. Yeah.
I did the individual shadow side of goodness and the collective shadow side of goodness.
Okay. I don't think I've listened to the collective one.
It was how as groups and ideologies, we actually, in service of solving something, we actually create destruction. And if you look at the history of humanity, the greatest atrocities are done on the service of goodness. So it shows you that's why like the victim mindset, it actually is very sneaky. It's much like, I actually now see that the far left and the far right, and no need to get political, but what I see it archetypically is the far right is overt narcissism and the far left is vulnerable covert narcissism. So it's like the shadow side of goodness is the same. It's this like covert vulnerable narcissism. And it's interesting in the research because people who identify as virtuous victims, and that's defined in the research, but who like need to fly flags of virtue, in the research, they're actually more likely to lie to gain a benefit in the study. And so it's like, wow, there's so much to that I think is so important that we understand. When we are people who are desiring to be seen as good, often we prefer to be seen as it than be it. if that makes sense. Because to be seen as it creates safety and also actually creates social status.
Oh man, it's so interesting as we get older, and I'm still unraveling the stories that I believed were true from my youth, and then from those, then the relationships I either trauma bonded or was codependency, and now unraveling those. There's so much that you just continuously unravel. But even with you though, I believe you've said that with relationships and, Thanksgiving and then the engagement that you called off, that you decided to make your mess your message. And in a way, I take my mess and now help people because I've experienced it. And I think so many people are on that path. And, those that you help can only go as far as you've gone. And I'm even, the last sentence in my book is in the epilogue after my mom passed. It's like, and now the healing begins.
Right. That's beautiful.
Because I just, I think we continuously heal. But do you feel, as a relationship expert, that you're still unraveling?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. We had a kid. That was a whole other...
That's a big shift and a big change. And for someone, and when you talk about familiarity, like, how has that been?
Well, I thought I was a good communicator until I had a kid. I was like, I got that dialed. But then you're like exhausted and stressed, and your partner is, and there's hormonal stuff going on, and there's pressure, and there's a whole new. You're launched into, now you have another human who has a whole. You are their needs for the first while of their life, and also, I was playing with my nephew, who's about a year and a bit older than our son. And this was right before our son was born. And we were playing with a game where it was like a little tractor trailer, and it had shapes on the outside, like a farmer, a cow, a sheep. And I remember watching him try to put like the cow in the sheep hole or something. And I was like, oh, that's like, he's not putting it in the right fucking spot. Like, let's go here. And I could sense my desire to want to take and show him where to put it. And I was like, oh, someone taught me that this is how you're supposed to do it. It's supposed to go in that hole. The shape's supposed to fit. But that's not true. That's just what I was taught. But he had it right. It was just to be with everything. It was just to explore the world. It was, I had this preconceived story about what success with this little trailer would be, and how I'd know he'd learn something under my company. Yay, Uncle Mark. And so I learned so much for that. And I learned so much from my son because, there's this saying that the thing that we have a hard time providing to our child is something that we weren't provided. So so there's if we have a hard time saying no to them, like we don't know the value of no. If we have a hard time being with their emotional ups and downs, maybe someone wasn't attuned or capable of holding ours when we were young. So I noticed him constantly expanding my capacity. There's a line from Alan Watts where he says, watch a baby try to poke the moon. I don't know why that stood out to me, because I didn't have a baby when I heard that. But I always remember thinking oh wow, the wondrous view of a child is to look up and not even know that they can't poke that thing. And so I'm forever, my relationship with my wife is forever deepening. Yeah. It's forever growing. My relationship to myself is doing that. I think entrepreneurship has really birthed a lot of that too, of codependencies in work, and wanting to care for employees and to make sure they don't suffer, and realizing that when you know the value of your own suffering, you don't try to protect people from theirs. You support them and do what you can, but you don't save people from things they require. And I always remember a line from Russell Brand where he said, when you save people from the bottom, you drag along it. Yeah. And so, what a beautiful line to the end of your book. And so the healing begins. And I think I think that's the complexity to always be holding is like you're always the caterpillar, you're always the cocoon, and you're always the butterfly. Like you're all three all the time because there's always something that's being cooked, you know?
Oh, yeah.
Like, and the moment you think your shit is done, like I just laugh now because the universe will give me a cosmic fucking dump truck to the head like, oh, you thought you had it?
I think that moment when you realize that shit's gonna hit the fan forever,
man. And it's like,
that
wow.
acceptance, and so it is. And
Isn't that such a beautiful,
easy?
like as you, I feel the same energetic or frequency to your words of and let the healing now begins.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah.
It's like, and so it is.
Yeah.
And so it is. And so it's like, how do we see? This is, I think, actually the giantest form of transformation that I think this is, I don't want to say the main key to true change, but I think this is the most important thing for people to get to, for change to become expansive, which is this. What leads us to need to change is usually something wrong, right? Like something fucked up happens in our life. Am I the most swearing guest you've ever had?
No.
You had Terry Cole.
Terry Cole.
She likes to drop F sharp.
My trainer, Sandy Brockman, she's from Austin, born and raised, and she's Texas girl.
I can't swear around my son now, so maybe I just save up the F word and it just comes out. But what's interesting is like what leads us to growth and change is usually something happens, we're not doing something well, whatever it is. So what is inherently underneath that is something's wrong with me that I need to change. I have an addiction, I choose the wrong people, whatever it is. So actually that's a beautiful thing because it causes you to turn within and to look for the things you choose, the patterns you have, your childhood. You start to uncover all this stuff, the light bulbs come on and you're like, holy crap, like now I have context to why I do this. It's not my fault. Okay, but let's go. But what has to shift is you have to go from there's something wrong with me that needs to be resolved to there's an opportunity for me to expand.
Yes.
So every time now something comes forward, and this is the blind spot of shame, if I don't relate to my inadequacies from a place of compassion and worth, then my inadequacies become more evidence of my inadequacy. So I'm not enough. That's why I need to fix this to become enough. But if you don't, it's like if you're a high performer, most people's high performance comes from the need to be seen. Like most high achievers, perfectionists, that is a survival strategy. Although it shows up in personality, most personality is just adaptive strategies. So it's like high performers, the real change that has to occur is if you've sourced all your success from your wound, then how do you source success without a wound? So you have to learn to let go of the wound and just be complete. And so that's where growth, change, opportunities, and you might be listening or watching this, and you're like, oh, I learned there's something I need to shift, or there's something da-da-da-da. And it's like, can it come from a place of recognition that you're just upgrading?
Yeah.
Like there's not a problem or a deficit, it just is, you know?
Yeah. I love that. I've had that conversation of like, why there was a doctor, a psychologist on the show, and I had this aha moment. I'm like, I wanted to be successful to prove something to my mother. But my mother never wanted to give me recognition. She never said, I'm proud of you. She never asked how I was when she was gone for those years. She never wanted to know about who I became. And it was like one of those like wounds that I had to work on. And to realize like I'm doing what my quote unquote success for me, I had to switch. I'm not doing it for anyone else to be seen. I'm doing it because it makes me feel good and the choices I make.
Yeah, and you being seen is actually required for people to see themselves, right? Yeah. Like by you doing what you do, someone else sees what you do and then sees themselves. Yeah. So it's like without the wound, you don't create. Yeah. You would not have become everything you are, and then you would not have helped heal millions of people. Like that's, you think of like, I hate the way the gift came, but the gift came and here's the gift.
You know, wouldn't change a thing.
Stephen Pressfield, who wrote The War of Art, he says in his book, the greater resistance, the greater the call to the soul. So like the more you are resistant to a project, a creation, a change, a transformation, a conversation, the more important that is to your soul's evolution. I firmly believe that because I've definitely experienced that.
I love that. Well, Mark Groves, anything else you want to add?
Well, thank you so much for having me. I'm so grateful that you traded time to be with me, and for you listening or watching that you did the same. I know it's one thing we haven't figured out how to get back yet, but I'm very grateful.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And pick up Liberated Love, release codependent patterns, and create the love you desire. And you cannot follow him on social media, but go to...
I have Mark Groves' podcast
Yes.
running. I have my producer runs it.
Yes.
But you can find me on YouTube, my podcast, and I have a Substack now.
We'll put all the links.
Yeah.
We'll put all the links in the show notes. All right.
Thanks
Thank
for
you very
having me.
much.
The big silence. The big silence. The big silence.